Earth Online is starting now. Please select your initial hero. Earth Online descends on Blue Star. Players from each country will choose an initial creature to compete for domination of Blue Star. As long as the chosen creature survives to the next version, its dominance will determine the rewards it receives. So in order to stand out, in this game full of countless species, players from every nation choose the most extreme stats and mechanics. However, in this new round, you're not playing by the rules. You directly picked a dumb creature hopping around with rocks. Because you're a transmigrator, you realize, almost everyone in this world believes in creationism. As a result, no one knows humans evolved from apes. So, you decide to use your complete knowledge of evolution to show them who the real bug in nature is. At this moment, you've just arrived watching the last version. In the previous version, the rulers of the land were giant beasts. They relied on overwhelming strength to suppress all other creatures. But then a massive meteor crashed down from the sky. The mighty dinosaur era ended just like that. As you were still watching, a cold mechanical voice suddenly echoed between heaven and earth. At the same time, a giant sky screen unfurled from high above. No matter where you are, just look up and you'll see it. Earth Online Global Update Announcement. Selection of Earth Online Country Civilizations Observers officially begins. The list of national civilization observers will be revealed in 3 minutes. 2. New version timeline. Fast forwarding to the 4.4 million BCE prehistoric time node. 3. Massive changes in this new version. Biological diversity is even greater. Detailed data will update in sync with the new version launch. Reward and punishment system fully upgraded. Winners get even richer rewards. Punishment for losers is also strengthened. Just a few lines of text instantly made the whole world tense up. What's even worse is, this time they only gave us 3 minutes. In the past, after each version update, once the observers were selected, there would be 3 to 10 days of preparation time. During that time, each country would spare no effort to cram their observers with knowledge and analyze the situation to develop strategies. But this time, the system caught everyone off guard. 3 minutes isn't enough for training, let alone to bring someone to the research base. At the same time, the classroom also fell silent. Everyone stared intensely at the sky screen, waiting for the name of Dragon Nation's next civilization observer. Finally, after a long global list broadcast, the line for Dragon Nation appeared. Dragon Nation Civilization Observer, Yang Chun. The next second, your photo appeared on the screen at the same time. The whole class blew up instantly. No way, Yang Chun. For real? There are so many people nationwide. How is it him? The previous observer was also from our school. And this time it's still us? What kind of luck does this school have? Luck, my ass. It's Yang Chun who got chosen. The guy who's always sleeping. Meanwhile, you also receive a system prompt. You are now the new civilization observer for Dragon Nation. Earth Online will pull you into the game now. You will be unable to contact the outside world until the session is settled. At this point, you have no choice but to accept. Meanwhile, at the Dragon Nation Capital Earth Online Special Research Team, things have become total chaos. Almost everyone in the base stopped what they were doing at once, staring at the 3-minute countdown prompt. Their faces went green. What's going on? Why only 3 minutes? There's no prep time this round. This is bad. What can we even do in this time? Team leader Elder Chin nearly blacked out, almost couldn't stay seated.
He's a giant in the Dragon Nation medical field.
And a key figure in the special research program. He was all set to follow the old process and take over for the new observer. But the system just scrapped the entire process. With no other option, he could only grit his teeth and order. Within 3 minutes, I want everything about this Yang Chun. All your files were soon laid out before Chinling. The good news is, you come from a top university, and it's also the alma mater of the previous observer. The academic atmosphere on campus is strong. Even if you're just an ordinary student, at least you have some foundation. But the bad news is, You're not an ordinary student at all. In fact, you're a well-known slacker in class. You usually sleep or space out during lessons. You even became depressed after being dumped by your ex. A total hopeless romantic and a loser. Seeing this, old Chin was numb. He could only force out, and this is our start. And the reaction from the public wasn't any better than the research team. As the Earth Online broadcast went live, people from all countries could communicate freely. Foreign viewers were already boasting non-stop about how professional their own country's observer is. Some say their representative is an animal expert. Some claim theirs is part of a special research team. And some are, as usual, mocking other countries to surrender now. But the real excitement was actually in Dragon Nation's exclusive chat room. Because just minutes after you were selected, your schoolmates were already spreading the word that you always sleep, slack off, and get distracted in class. Even napping through Earth Online classes. That really unsettled all of Dragon Nation. They just barely survived the last round's disaster after losing. And now the system made it clear. Punishment will be even harsher in the new version. In other words, if they lose again, Dragon Nation could be looking at a disaster even worse than the last. So, hashtags like Yang Chun Slacker Dragon Nation Worst Luck quickly shot up the trending list. Countless people rushed into the live stream, watching you on screen, looking around, appearing a bit unfamiliar but calm. Their hope slowly sank. But not everyone has given up hope. Some people say the other countries also had no prep time, so Dragon Nation isn't necessarily doomed. Others say, this land never lacks miraculous last-minute comebacks. Until the very last moment, no one can say it's over for sure. Right now, you've already been pulled by the system into a special virtual space. Over 100 civilization observers are gathered here, each with their national flag floating above their head. The global broadcast is live outside, so everyone around the world can see what's going on here. Soon, people started forming groups on site, fellow countries or similar alliances, gathering together automatically.
The American
Civilization Observer was quickly surrounded by a bunch of followers, and looked the most dominant. On your side, people also started coming over to you one by one. It's just that most of them are representatives from the Middle East, Africa, and some small countries, and their numbers are clearly much smaller than the other side. Obviously, before this version officially began, the international landscape was already silently reflecting itself. However, what truly made everyone snap to attention wasn't these minor moves, but the new rules the system announced next. As civilization observers, you are, to some degree, allowed to intervene with the observed species, and thereby alter the species' historical progress, or even their evolutionary direction. But you can't intervene more than 3 times, and the extent must also stay within strict limits. Note, when civilization observers wish to intervene, they can connect with outside support. As soon as this was said, many people's eyes lit up, because in previous versions, civilization observers could basically only watch. They couldn't interfere with the species' fate. But with this new rule, the game's level of player agency skyrocketed. Migration routes, body structure, evolutionary trends, all could now be affected within certain limits. For major powers, this meant their national research teams finally had a chance to really get involved. For observers, it meant winning or losing wasn't just luck anymore. Now there was an element of strategic play. The Longo Research Group's staff finally breathed a little easier and immediately ordered everyone to stay alert so they could provide the most complete data support the moment an intervention was launched. But at the same time, you could see things more clearly than most. What seemed like an opportunity was also a deeper trap. Intervening in a species' evolution might sound like just adding points to their stats, but biological evolution has never been as simple as just strength or speed. Just being strong doesn't mean you'll adapt to the environment, and being large doesn't guarantee you'll survive longer. Throughout history, countless seemingly powerful species were ruthlessly eliminated by the environment or the food chain. In other words, if those 3 interventions are used on the wrong ones, it might kill them off even faster than doing nothing. So, you remind yourself to be extremely cautious. Soon the version preview officially began. Although the system notification said the official timeline for the new version has been moved up to 4.4 million years ago, the actual preview starts with the end of the last version. High above the sky, a meteor plunges down to Earth, and the endgame of the Cretaceous is reenacted for everyone. Doomsday arrives. The dinosaur dynasty is wiped out. Continental plates tremble, and the world slowly restores order amidst lingering ashes. The tens of millions of years that followed rush by in an instant on the screen. After the catastrophe, the dominant life forms that survived by luck were mostly small, highly adaptable mammals. As the world warmed up again, forests spread, laying the environmental foundation for a great expansion of life in the Neogene. Another 10 million years passed, and the globe gradually cooled. Grasslands began to expand, and the Oligocene saw a dramatic boom in mammalian life. Pigs, cattle, sheep, horses, elephants, the ancestors of cats, subcats, dogs, whales, and bats appeared one after another. This entire evolutionary process over nearly 43 million years was breezed through as a brief preview. Because these did not belong to the official version, they were only shown to convey that the age of dinosaurs is over, and a new era for mammals has truly begun. Then the real new version and competition began. At this point, your expression changed noticeably for the first time. Because if memory from your previous life is right, the interstellar chronicle starts roughly 23 million years ago, marking a critical period that lasts over 20 million years. It's also in this era that our human ancestors will gradually step onto the stage of history. But for most people both inside and outside the arena, they can't see that part yet. They first see what's still the most direct and exciting, massive, powerful creatures. As global temperatures continued to drop, vast forests were replaced by grasslands. Herbivorous mammals began to multiply explosively. The first to awe everyone were the proboscidean gomphotheres, over 5 meters long, weighing more than 12 tons, with a similar appearance to modern elephants, but with shorter trunks and long, downward curving tusks. Immediately after, the stegodonts and dinotheres, shovel-tuskers and other lineages emerged one by one. While their types varied, they all had one thing in common: sheer size. After 3 versions dominated by dinosaurs, everyone had been conditioned with that worldview. So the first thought in many minds was still very simple: bigger must be better. In the Longo research group, Professor Chin instantly placed the proboscideans as candidates for special study, because in terms of sheer size and stability, they really did look like the safest bet in the new version. Next up was the rhinoceros family. 2-horned rhinos, black rhinos, white rhinos all appeared. Also quite large, but still smaller than the elephants. And not exactly fast either. Chin's verdict was straightforward. They could be backup choices, but were unlikely to reach the top of the food chain. Moving on to the grasslands of 18 million years ago, horses evolved from the ancestral grassland horses, with forms quite similar to modern-day horses. Strong limbs, excellent runners. Then deer species had their population boom. Horned deer, ancient giraffes, Sametherium. Needle-horned deer, round-horned deer, strange-horned deer, and Civatherium, huge diversity, spreading all across the grasslands. They didn't necessarily have the most massive bodies, but to survive and thrive on the vast plains, they had the most practical conditions: speed, herd size, and adaptability. If those earlier scenes still stuck to the old mindset, that megafauna equals strength, then the next scene directly shattered that simplistic belief. The subfamily saber-toothed cats appeared. Short-sword Smilodon stood about 1.2 meters at the shoulder, with a body length over 3 meters, and more than twice the weight of a modern male lion. It had long limbs, a very solid body, but most striking were the 2 deadly saber-shaped fangs in its mouth. Clearly, even more important was that the system directly provided footage of it hunting large proboscideans, showing speed, strength, and deadly efficiency all maxed out. That moment gave everyone watching chills, because it meant that the top ecological niche in this new competition might not belong to the biggest herbivores, but could instead go to those apex predators capable of taking down the largest animals. Not to mention, The saber-toothed cat subfamily itself is a huge category, with Homotherium, Macharotus, Smilodon, Denictus, and fearsome cats and their branches, all making their appearance one after another, coming on stage in quick succession. Each one exuded an obvious aura of apex predator. Within the Dragon Nation research team, even the diligent faces finally turned serious. In his view, saber-toothed cats were likely closer to this version than elephants. But the system clearly wasn't intent on giving only one path. Bears appeared. But at this point, ancestor bears were only about 1 meter in size, mostly living in jungles, feeding on plants, insects, and small mammals. They just weren't impressive enough yet. Next, the giant hunting dog arrived. Its size several times larger than modern wild dogs, capable of hunting large mammals. Then came the aquatic Purosaurus. It exceeded 11 meters in length and weighed over 6 tons. It had the most terrifying bite force among land animals. And then there was the massive Wanambi snake. Its standing height was exaggerated to an incredible level. The Argentine giant eagle spread its wings like a small plane. And when the scene shifted to the ocean, true giants appeared, once again making everyone collectively hold their breath. The megalodon was over 20 meters long and weighed more than 90 tons. Its massive jaws could open to an astonishing diameter, reaching up to an incredible 3 meters. After dinosaurs left the stage on land, giant beasts never truly disappeared. They simply sank into the ocean, continuing to reign over another world. Its enormous size, terrifying bite force, and apex predatory status instantly captivated nations everywhere. In many people's eyes, it was basically a continuation of the age of dinosaurs, the new overlord of the sea. So one potential candidate species after another was put on the table. Elephants, saber-toothed cats, giant hunting dogs, Purosaurus, megalodon. Every single one looked ridiculously strong. Everyone seemed worth betting on. But just when most people were focused on these massive creatures and top predators, the system suddenly fast-forwarded again. The timeline jumped to 5.8 million years ago in prehistory. The screen shifted from vast grasslands and deep seas to the edge of the grassland, a sparse forest. A group of proto-apes cautiously perched among the branches. They could stand upright for short moments, but most of the time they moved between branches using their arm strength. They were timid by nature, easily startled by the slightest rustle. They fed on fruit. Strength, size, speed. Compared to the top species shown before, they were hardly worth mentioning. They looked so weak, pitiful, and scared. The system then gave their name, Australopithecus ancestor. Because they were so weak, they didn't even dare set foot on the ground yet. The timeline kept rapidly fluctuating. Millions of years were just a blink of an eye in the long history of evolution. Until 4.4 million years ago, the fast-forwarding timeline finally stopped. At the same time, the system's mechanical voice rang in the ears of every civilization observer. The era of giant beasts has become history. Mammals have taken the stage, evolving into thousands of species. A new competition is about to begin. The next world overlord is about to emerge. Earth Online's new version has now launched. All civilization observers, please, choose your respective ecosystem species within 30 minutes. As the announcement ended, people in the virtual space began disappearing one by one. All you saw was a flash of white light before your eyes. When you opened your eyes again, you were already standing on the grasslands of 4.4 million years ago. Soft earth under your feet. The air was so crisp and clean, unlike the modern world. Not far away, you could see large animals moving around. At this moment, the official species selection phase began. Right now, it felt as if you suddenly gained the perspective of a creator. With just a single thought, you could call up information on all living species in the world. And with another thought, you could instantly teleport near the species you chose to observe them up close. But here's the problem. The selection time was only half an hour. It's impossible to review every species from beginning to end. So each civilization observer had to first narrow down their choices by reviewing the preview, lock onto a direction, then check the data, then personally inspect, and finally pick their target as quickly as possible. The rules were the same as before. If multiple observers went after the same species, they would have to face a system competition. It could be rock, paper, scissors, or it could be a battle of wits, or even a test of pure physical strength. Whoever won got the species, whoever lost would have to choose another target. If you still couldn't decide by the end, the system would randomly assign you one. As soon as the rule was announced, the streaming rooms erupted with excitement. In the exclusive Dragon Nation streaming room, most people assumed saber-toothed cats would be the hottest pick. After all, that hunting scene with giant mammals in the preview was just too stunning. Some people wanted to play it safe, figuring that since competition would be fierce, it was better to go straight for elephants. At least they're big and steady, so you wouldn't waste your time in vain. But more people were worried not about which species to choose, but whether you would even choose anything at all. After all, according to rumor, you were the type who always slept in class, and usually slacked off at school. In the last version, Han Yu failed in the competition, and couldn't get the strongest dinosaur, which caused trouble down the line. Now it's your turn, so nobody was counting on you too much. But from the very beginning, you had no intention of fighting the world for saber-toothed cats. In your eyes, the real answer was definitely not any of those ferocious-looking beasts, but rather a god-tier species disguised as weak and trashy. Australopithecus ancestor, or the future terrifying upright ape. The so-called terrifying upright ape was basically a nickname for the branch of evolution that led to early humans. Australopithecus ancestor marked the major turning point from apes to humans. But at 4.4 million years ago, it was still pathetically weak. Faced with the large predators of the grassland and forest, it was barely surviving. According to normal history, it would need another 2 million years of evolution, with upright posture, tools, fire, and group coordination, gradually developing, before finally reaching the stage of the terrifying upright ape. But the problem was, normal history is way too slow. You, on the other hand, had 3 chances to actively intervene in evolution. These 3 chances, to put it plainly, were basically cheat codes. As long as you used them well, you could drastically speed up the evolutionary process. Across the entire game version, no other species could even come close to future humans in terms of potential. Others saw a weak little monkey, but you saw the ultimate answer that would one day top the food chain and remake the entire world order. So you chose it without hesitation. Brought up the data panels for 10 groups of primitive apes. 10 groups of primitive ape strength, 3 stars. Running speed, 2 stars. Neural response, 3 stars. Endurance, 4 stars. Intelligence, 5 stars. Energy consumption, 6 stars. This is a set of stats that would make almost any normal person frown in disbelief. Strength is lacking. Speed is poor. Reaction is mediocre. Even endurance is just barely adequate. Intelligence is the only slightly outstanding trait. But the energy consumption is ridiculously high, reaching 6 stars. This means it eats a lot, burns a ton of energy, and has little room for mistakes. In nature, this is basically a textbook example of a species that's doomed to be eliminated. At the same time, the Dragon Nation's research group is still watching your feed. The director watches you, constantly lingering on the 10 primitive ape data screens, his frown growing deeper and deeper. The comparison is just brutal. Next door, the short-sword saber-toothed tiger. Strength 7 stars. Speed 5 stars. Reaction 7 stars.
Endurance 6 stars.
Intelligence 4 stars. Energy consumption 5 stars. Except for slightly lower intelligence. It's almost a textbook well-rounded warrior. Xian Ke may be slow, but his strength is often 8 or 9 stars, crushing everything with pure power. Balanced stats have their own playstyle. Specialization also has its advantages. But as for the primitive ape line, besides the glaringly high energy consumption flaw, there's really nothing worth betting on. So, Old Chin once figured you were just glancing a bit longer than usual, and would quickly give up. In fact, you did go on to check other species stats afterward, and you checked over a dozen kinds at a glance. This let the research team breathe a little easier, thinking at least you know how to compare. But in reality, you were just confirming your own judgment. Anyway, almost nobody will compete for this primitive ape build, bottom of the barrel. Even if someone really did, in this world where nobody studies fossils or believes in evolution, and people generally believe in creationism, no one could really pull this off. No one would ever think that humans could emerge from such a weak group of apes. Even if you didn't end up getting the primitive ape, you're still confident that with 3 interventions, you could get other species to survive till end of the game. But if you wanted first place, this is the only path you could really gamble on. After looking at enough data, you finally acted and directly chose to teleport to the habitat of the 10 primitive ape groups. The next second you vanished from the grassland and reappeared on the edge of a sparse forest. But ironically, another nearby area was bustling with activity. By the lakeside, 7 or 8 civilization observers were gathered together, with a tense standoff in the air. David from America and Natasha from Bear Nation, as well as Toru Yamashita from Sakura Nation, were all there. This is the habitat of the short-sword saber-toothed tiger. Clearly, this group was competing for a spot with one of the most popular species of the event. As soon as you appeared, several pairs of eyes immediately turned to you. Toru Yamashita squinted at you with obvious hostility. David instinctively became more alert, clearly seeing you as another rival. But Natasha was the first to extend an olive branch, saying if you were willing, you could form a temporary alliance and kick the others out first. Viewers in the Dragon Nation's live stream, seeing this, even started to hope for a comeback. After all, you actually showed up at the scene. Maybe you finally changed your mind and decided to go all in. But the next second, you simply waved your hand and calmly refused. This one's yours to fight over. I've already picked my target, so I won't be bothering you. And with that, you showed no hesitation, walking straight past the saber-toothed tiger's habitat, without looking back. Not just the people at the scene, but even the viewers were stunned. With the meta's strongest option right in front of you, you didn't even try to compete. Even if you might not win, you should at least give it a shot. But you skipped even that, turned and left. Nobody could figure out what you were thinking. But soon enough, they couldn't be bothered anymore. Because as time ticked down, when the final 10 minutes hit, the system will force everyone competing for the same species into the game. Winner takes all, losers out. So over at the saber-toothed tiger's spot, a fierce competition was destined to take place. But you were already at the base of a tree in the woods. Between the trees, a small ape was hiding behind the leaves, cautiously watching the surroundings. Alert like a little animal ready to bolt at any moment, you glanced up at him and promptly submitted your answer to the system. Dragon Nation Civilization Observer selects the primitive ape as the observation target. With no competitors, a beam of light quickly descended, enveloping both you and the little ape. A robotic system message rang out. Dragon Nation Observer Yang Chung confirmed. Observation target, primitive ape. Binding in progress. Binding successful. As soon as the news broke, the entire Dragon Nation exploded. Back at the research team, Chin Lao's teacup crashed onto the floor with a bang. His pant leg scalded by hot water and he didn't even notice. The whole lab fell dead silent at first, then broke into sobs of disbelief. With so many strong species available, you chose the all-around weak primitive ape. If this isn't crazy, what is? Even more worrying, given your file describing your odd state after a breakup. As if you've totally given up on life. Some of the research team began to suspect you might be mentally unstable, deliberately seeking revenge against society. The more you think about it, the more despair you feel. After all, a normal person would find it hard to make such a choice in this situation. Meanwhile, the main livestream and viewers from all nations have completely turned this into a big joke. Viewers from South Korea, Japan, and the US all chimed in, mocking whether China is about to test Confucian values, purposely conceding a round. Someone outright said that China is handing over their national destiny. Others sarcastically brought up Sun Wukong, sniping that maybe the Monkey King could cause chaos in heaven too. Chinese viewers were furious instantly, but there was nothing they could do to vent, because the data from the primal land was so obviously terrible. Even forced bravado had no confidence behind it. Yet, you couldn't care less about any of this. In your eyes, the primal land is absolutely a late-game powerhouse. If you have to divide stages, as soon as the throwing skill is unlocked, that pretty much counts as officially entering the late game. By then, who would dare claim this isn't the best pick? The answer is half an hour passed quickly. Species choices from all nations were finalized one after another. The highly anticipated saber-toothed tiger competition was won, surprisingly, by South Korea's Cha Tae-hyun. That outcome was unexpected for many. The US's David was actually the first eliminated from the competition. After losing the saber-toothed tiger, he decisively snatched the Argentinian giant eagle and finally claimed the aerial overlord. Russia's Natasha lost out on the saber-toothed tiger, but managed to secure the elephant ancestor in another round. What most struck a nerve with Chinese viewers was Japan's Yamashita Tetsuya. He was originally left waiting for a random system assignment, but luck gave him the giant hunting dog, and it was a strong social predator. His luck was just absurd. This made the China livestream even gloomier. They had purposely chosen the weakest opponent. Even random selection could have gotten them a strong pick. How are you supposed to play now? Soon, the system announced the official start of the new version. All civilization observers returned to the virtual space. Each sat in front of a chair. A screen appeared before them, showing the real-time evolution of their chosen species. Since each version typically spans hundreds of thousands, or even more than 1,000,000 years, the system compresses the entire timeline down to about a month, fast-forwarded in a documentary style, only preserving the key points. And so the fate of the primal land officially unfolded before everyone. Once the screen cleared up, the first thing apparent was environmental degradation. Due to violent climate changes, what was once a relatively dense rainforest has become more and more sparse. Distances between trees keep increasing. The little ape you're connected to crouches on a lonely branch of a large tree, alertly watching its surroundings. There were never many of its kind here, because of limited food. Now every wild fruit on the trees has been eaten clean. The little ape hasn't eaten anything in 2 days. And more brutal still, this morning, an elderly ape starved to death after falling from the tree. It was soon dragged off by a saber-toothed tiger. It doesn't really know what death means, but deep in its genes, a hardwired law keeps reminding it. The ground is dangerous. If you fall to the ground, there's danger everywhere. Yet hunger is also forcing it toward death. It stands on the branch, spots another cluster of trees about 100 meters away. Maybe there are fruits there. Maybe there's a way out. But that 100 meters, for a primal land ape that only knows how to swing and leap between branches, feels like an insurmountable gap. It stares at the ground below. Every cell in its body seems to be screaming alerts. Fear instinctively forces it to retreat, hiding on thicker, higher branches, as if the farther from the ground, the safer it feels. A wail broke out in the China livestream. Many are convinced this is an extinction waiting to happen. A hellish opening scene. No food in the trees. Nothing but predators on the ground. These apes have no way out. But you keep watching the screen, your expression more focused than anyone. Because you know, that historic step is maybe just one moment away. Hunger and fear, colliding violently in that brain barely the size of an orange, clashing fiercely. It can't think clearly like a human, but survival instincts will still force a decision. Trees have provided the primal land with millions of years of protection, so they've survived by clinging to branches until now. But now there aren't enough trees. The environment has changed. Their old ways can't sustain them anymore. To survive, they must let go. Finally, hunger outweighs fear. The little ape grabs the branch, hangs its body in the air for a moment, then suddenly lets go. With a thud, for the first time, it lands truly on the ground. Fear instantly sweeps over it again. It looks around in panic, like death could pounce at any second. But survival gives it little time to hesitate. It starts using both hands and feet to support its body, running and leaping, desperately charging toward that cluster of trees 100 meters away. As it runs, its hands start to get in the way, so its waist slowly straightens out. Movements relying on climbing and hopping gradually shift to a more upright sprint. Its strides get longer, its body straighter, Just like that. Before it even realizes it, it's already at the edge of the new trees, diving into a world of fresh fruits. It survived, and this scene was witnessed by the other apes in the sparse forest. They all saw it. They poked their heads out, staring intently at the little ape across the way, gnawing on fruits. They don't understand the concept of paths or lessons learned, but hunger is the most primal, real message. The first one stepped out. Now the second and third get restless. Soon a second ape lands on the ground. Then a third, a fourth. More and more primal land apes leap from the trees, racing toward the new forest 100 meters away. The ground remains dangerous for them, but at least it's no longer absolute doom. In the live stream, some viewers felt moved. Someone admitted they had no hope for these apes at first, but seeing them force themselves forward to survive, they couldn't help but be shaken. Still, meanwhile, most remain pessimistic, because looking at the outcome, it was just a bunch of weaklings, finally learning to forage on the ground. Compared to beasts who already hunt large prey in packs, the gap is still daunting, unbelievably huge, and right when everyone's emotions are mixed. A more brutal scene unfolds. 20 or 30 apes dropped down and ran one after another. The commotion eventually alerted the nearby dagger saber-toothed tiger. At first, that apex predator also didn't expect this group of timid creatures that always hid in the trees would actually swagger along today, exposing themselves on the ground. It slowly crouched down, silently creeping closer. Only when it was close enough did it suddenly pounce. One leap, one pin down. The poor monkey it caught didn't even have a chance to struggle. The size difference was just too great. With just one paw, the dagger saber-toothed tiger could pin down half its body. Then that massive jaw, capable of opening 120 degrees, yawned wide. Two saber-like fangs came down hard. With precision and ruthlessness, it instantly ended the monkey's life. Its struggles quickly weakened. A dozen seconds later, the monkey went completely still. It was carried off by the saber-toothed tiger. The entire process was ruthlessly efficient. The Korean livestream erupted in celebration. After all, Sha Tae-hyun was bound to the dagger saber-toothed tiger. And this time, the prey just happened to be the Dragon Country's original D-Yuan. So, a huge wave of Korean netizens flooded into the China stream, trash-talking right to their faces, thanking China for delivering food since their monkeys couldn't even resist. They said the victory was basically handed over by you. Comments like that were everywhere. Chinese viewers were already frustrated. Now they really exploded. They immediately launched a wave of counterattacks. Many just barged into the Korean stream, using their numbers to completely overwhelm the chat. Soon on the Korean livestream, it was basically flooded with Channel 2 comments by Chinese viewers, meaning Chinese stream. But you don't care about these online flame wars at all. To you, losing one or two original D-Yuan isn't the point. Nature always advances through the cruelty of selection. That's how progress happens. What you really care about is that the whole group has finally set foot on the ground. That under the threat of life and death, they've started to learn to run, learn to stand upright. Because in your eyes, things that come after this step, like fire and tools, are still important. But strength is the foundation of everything. Primates can walk this path, precisely because they've spent generations climbing and leaping between branches. In order to grasp branches, their feet are wide enough, almost like hands, with strong gripping ability. This gave them the chance to truly raise their bodies upright. In nature, most predators are digitigrade, walking on their toes like felines. They sacrifice stability for speed. Prey animals go even further, most being unguligrade, which means they're basically sprinting on their toenails. They do run faster, but they've totally given up the possibility of real upright posture. Only by standing upright can hands be freed. Hands no longer have to support body weight or help with running, and gradually evolve to become more refined. All those abilities, gripping, pinching, catching, throwing, are only possible when hands are finally freed up. That's the foundation. Only after reaching that point will tools be invented. and fire can possibly be controlled. Otherwise, even if another animal understands the principle of fire from friction and tries it with its mouth, it could try for 100 million years and never make a spark. So you need to wait a little longer. The original Di Yuan must truly internalize standing upright as a part of their instinct. Only after everything becomes stable will it be time for your first true intervention. The scene moves forward. This group of monkeys that reached the new forest at least survive for now. And what happened today, for them, was about much more than just finding food. For the first time, they came down from the trees. For the first time, crossed 100 meters of death zone. For the first time, learned that while the ground is dangerous, it's not completely off limits. What they did today will sink in like a kind of primal code, slowly becoming part of their genes and instincts. Next time food runs out, they'll still migrate, and migrate again the next time. Once, twice, 20 times, 30 times. Until one day, the earth is not just a symbol of fear, but truly becomes their home. The evolution of life is all about learning to adapt in danger, and learning to make use of opportunities in adaptation, finally conquering the environment. At dusk, the sun sinks below the horizon. The prehistoric sky is so clean it almost feels unreal. No forests of steel, no smoke or smog. Looking up, the stars cover everything. On a tree branch, the ape who was the first to jump to the ground today is sitting quietly. Usually he would have been asleep by this time, but today he ate too much, and his stomach is uncomfortably bloated. He can only remain in a sitting position, so he stays there with nothing to do. The wind blows through his long, thin hair. His eyes, which should have been vacant, suddenly look through the gaps in the leaves and cast their gaze toward the night sky. He sees the galaxy, so he just watches. Not just a glance or two, but a long, steady gaze. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 1 hour, 2 hours. At this moment, the end of the sky screen freezes its focus on him. No one knows what he is doing, and no one knows what he is actually thinking. Logically, with his orange-sized brain, it shouldn't be enough to support the act of thinking. But is that really the case? When the sky screen fixed the camera, for a long time, on that little ape looking up at the stars, the Dragon Kingdom research team and the livestream audience were almost all anxious. Observers from other civilizations were busy analyzing data, observing habits to find weaknesses, and calculating how to supplement strength later, increase speed, or change the environment, trying as much as possible to push the observed species toward a more perfect direction. Yet, you, seemingly toward an ape dazing on a tree branch, have developed a great interest. The observation perspective refuses to move away. In their view, this is completely meaningless. Rather than staring at a full, little ape dazing on a branch, it's better to watch how other Ardipithecus are still active. At least they could analyze some physiological flaws and future directions for intervention. Even Qinluo is a bit confused at this moment. What exactly are you trying to do? Aside from slacking off, they couldn't think of any other explanation for a moment. However, no one can understand what walking upright means for Ardipithecus. Similarly, no one can understand what it means for an ape to gaze at the starry sky for the first time for a long time. What does it really signify? Perhaps he is not yet capable of true thinking. That brain, only the size of an orange, cannot yet carry overly complex logic. But consciousness has clearly begun to sprout. Once consciousness appears, curiosity, fear, courage, and loss, these most primary emotions will be born along with it. Why is he staring at those glowing things in the sky? Maybe it's just pure curiosity about what they are, or if they are edible. Maybe it's just because the stars are too bright and far away, too eye-catching, so he forgot to look down while watching. Whatever the answer is, the result is already predestined. At this moment, he has become curious about the starry sky, and this curiosity itself is an epoch-making thing. He might, never in his short life, touch those points of light, nor could he verify his doubts. But this initial emotion will be like some extremely faint, yet stubborn information, sinking bit by bit into the depths of the genes, passing down through the bloodline continuously. His descendants might, on an ordinary night, look up again and see the same starry sky, and then feel the same confusion in the deepest part of their genes. Generation after generation, 100 years, 1,000 years, 10,000 years, a million years, until millions of years later, this long-lasting question is finally truly answered. To others, Earth Online is just a national destiny game. But to you, it's more like a history of human origins unfolded directly before your eyes. Billions of years of evolution. From single cell to prehistoric times, the ape species finally waited for the first life that would stop its pace and look up to gaze at the universe. Just a few million years later, humans would be able to truly step into the sea of stars. If looking up at the stars is compared to finding a gem on the ground, then the entire subsequent human civilization is merely finally bending down to pick it up. So you solemnly record this scene. In your view, when the first ape looked up at the galaxy, humanity's exploration of the universe was actually 80% complete. The notebook in your hand is quickly filled up, but the shock of this moment, besides you, is understood by no one. Immediately after, the sky screen accelerates again. The rise and fall of a race is never an overnight matter. Ever since the first Ardipithecus stepped onto the ground to survive and ran toward a new forest, this behavior was inherited by the entire group. Soon, when the fruits in the new forest were eaten up again, Ardipithecus no longer did as they had before, waiting to die in the trees. But for the second and third time, they descended from the branches to the ground and migrated toward further places. Since the original environment could no longer support them, they would chase after food and adapt to new habitats. Thus, trees gradually ceased to be their only home. They began to be active on the ground more often, starting to be hunted by various top predators, while tenaciously surviving. The key to supporting all of this is precisely walking upright. The disadvantages of being upright are very obvious. Speed becomes slower, and it's harder to escape when facing wild beasts. But it also brought extremely important advantages. First is the decrease in energy consumption. Quadrupedal walking is like full-time four-wheel drive. 4 support points exert force simultaneously, stable but particularly energy-consuming. Bipedal upright walking is more like an inverted pendulum that keeps leaning forward and then being pulled back. The body will move forward alternately using gravitational potential energy. The result is that under the same physical reserves, the consumption of walking upright is significantly reduced. In the system's 6 dimensions, Ardipithecus' originally exaggerated energy consumption index dropped from 6 stars to 5 stars. And besides that, uprightness has a more direct, more physical advantage: heat dissipation. A quadruped's entire back is exposed to the sun. The heating area is too large. Once running long distances, the body temperature can easily become too high. But after Ardipithecus stood upright, the area facing the scorching sun decreased sharply. The body could dissipate heat more easily, allowing them to continue walking under high temperatures. The result was, their endurance further improved. They could go further, last longer, and thus have the chance to find food in a larger range. Thus, a seemingly incredibly weak species, relying only on this small change, managed to survive all the way from the start of the version. It even began to show a trend of expansion and growth. Soon the sky screen fixed the camera on a pregnant female Ardipithecus. Her abdomen was bulging. A new life was being nurtured. This should have been the hope for the continuation of the entire race. But it is also precisely here that walking upright, the most fatal price to pay, was revealed for the first time with absolute clarity. Once labor began, the mother empress ape was in such agony she nearly twisted from the pain. The entire birth process was far more difficult than anyone could have imagined. She instinctively let out sharp, piercing screams. Her cries echoed endlessly across the wilderness. For modern humans, the screams of childbirth are simply a sign of pain. But in a perilous prehistoric environment, this was practically begging to reveal one's location. One careless move could attract nearby predators, putting the entire group in mortal danger. This time, they got lucky. There were no large predators nearby. But the problem is, in nature, you can't always depend on luck. In the Dragon Country research group, Old Chin watched this scene and finally saw through everything. He pointed out that gorillas, monkeys, and similar animals can occasionally stand up and walk, but that doesn't make them true humans. Their pelvises are wider for upright posture, and their legs are shorter. They have to walk with noticeably bowed, splayed legs just to keep their balance. And most of the time, they still rely on their hands for support, let alone running long distances. Even staying upright is a challenge. But the proto-apes were different. From their first steps to generations later, their bodies grew increasingly upright. The stance between their legs narrowed further and further. Their way of walking got closer and closer to that of actual humans. In other words, they were mastering a trait that should belong solely to humans. By current knowledge on Blue Star, this was explosive news. After all, the world mostly believes in creationism. Humans are seen as unique and superior beings. Who would want to accept that apes in the game are actually replicating human abilities? Shocking as it was, physiological laws wouldn't change for that reason. And the real problems arrived quickly. Walking upright meant the pelvis gradually became narrower, while the fetus would keep sinking lower due to gravity. For most quadrupedal mammals, giving birth is almost automatic. Mothers can even deliver while standing, and oviparous animals just lay eggs. But with proto-apes, it's different. A narrow pelvis turned labor into a true life or death ordeal. On the sky screen, the mother empress ape endured over an hour of severe pain, barely managing to give birth. Any accident at all could have been fatal for both her and the infant. Kinlao quickly spotted something even more brutal. In order for the baby to pass through safely, an overly narrow birth canal prevents the fetus from fully developing in the womb. It can only be born early. In other words, proto-ape infants, like human babies, are born prematurely, half-developed. And it's exactly because of this. Human children take a long time before they can walk, while most mammals can stand and run soon after birth. For humans at the top of the food chain, this is nothing. But for proto-apes who could be stalked by predators at any time, it's nearly a death sentence. This alone could be fatal for a group already so weak, with such difficult births and such fragile infants. It almost looks like they're doomed. So the Dragon Country research group's opinion was quickly unified. If there's a way to provide outside help later, the safest strategy would be direct intervention and have the proto-apes abandon upright walking, returning to the quadrupedal mode that suited them better. Mr. Chin even had people start documenting on the spot the current pelvis of the proto-apes, spinal muscles and walking data, getting ready to study how to reverse this mistake. Meanwhile, viewers in the Dragon Country livestream, even without Kinling's professional knowledge, felt their scalps tingle from watching. In the neighboring bear country, saber-toothed elephant calves could stand and walk right after birth, at least keeping themselves alive. But look over here. These newborn proto-ape infants were as frail as a lump of underformed flesh. The mother was almost completely spent, let alone the proto-apes, who, all this time, were not dominating or attacking others like some species, nor showcasing their strength. They were constantly running for their lives and feeding on wild fruit and roots. It really seemed like they had no advantage at all. Even so, you still didn't take action. From your perspective, a fatal flaw isn't always a bad thing. Many times, it becomes the trigger that pushes evolution forward, just like the environment forced proto-apes out of the trees. At crossroads between life and death, life often finds its own way through desperation. So he kept watching the scene, without rushing to intervene even once. Soon, the sky screen gave even more specific results. The newborn proto-ape was indeed extremely fragile.
It couldn't even open its eyes.
Its limbs were short and weak, and its hair was so sparse, it was almost pitiful. It could only lie on the giant leaves its mother had found earlier. Wiggling gently like a tiny caterpillar, it made faint, weak cries. This was its only way of expressing needs. The mother ape was already pushed to her absolute limit. But the motherly instinct embedded in all mammals still drove her to act. She struggled to hold the infant close and tried to nurse. But the problem was, giving birth had drained all her strength and nutrients. She couldn't produce even a drop of milk. Without food, this underdeveloped infant wouldn't last a single day. More cruelly, although there were other proto-apes nearby, the most they did was huddle for safety and gather together. They had no sense of helping one another. They could see the mother ape's struggles, but had no idea what they should do. Helping others was still too unfamiliar for proto-apes at this stage. The female ape looks around. In those hollow eyes, a certain complex emotion clearly emerges for the first time. Until finally, he settles his gaze on a taller and stronger male Ardipithecus. That is the biological father of the infant. According to the most common logic in nature, the male is responsible for providing genes and then turns to leave. Raising the offspring is the female's job. But this time, it was the male ape-like animal. From the grass, he digs out 2 wild fruits he had hidden earlier, walks up to the female holding the fruit, and makes a few chirping sounds, as if conveying some indescribable meaning. The female ape seems to understand. She almost snatches the fruit and eagerly stuffs it into her mouth. She knows she must replenish her nutrition immediately to be able to produce milk and keep the infant in her arms alive. And that male Ardipithecus did not become dissatisfied because the food was eaten. He just tilts his head, looking at the mother for a moment, and then at that pitifully small infant. At this moment, his brain has expanded from the size of an early orange to something closer to a grapefruit. The increase in brain capacity brings not only faster reflexes, but also a bit of judgment beginning to take shape. He seems to realize for the first time that this fragile little thing is inextricably linked to himself. Offspring are the underlying code of all life. No matter what kind of creature, everything they do in the final analysis cannot bypass reproduction and continuation. So, he seems to have completed, since his birth, his most difficult piece of thinking. If he wants the offspring to survive, he must first let the mother survive. And with the mother holding the infant, she cannot forage for food or protect herself alone. In other words, as long as the infant hasn't grown up, he must stay. At this moment, he perhaps touches the edge of responsibility for the first time. In the eyes of others, this is just a male Ardipithecus handing over 2 fruits. Nothing special and nothing to talk about. But you watch with a jolt in your heart, because just like the first ape jumping down from a branch and stepping onto the earth, these are small but critical turns in history. Evolution is never a destiny-changing reversal overnight, but rather countless insignificant small changes, stacking up time and again under the pressure of life and death, finally completely rewriting the path of a species. The high-difficulty childbirth brought by upright walking forced Ardipithecus to support each other. A mother simply couldn't raise such a fragile infant alone. So, if the offspring were to survive, a new relational structure had to emerge. Thus, the family began to sprout. That male Ardipithecus did not leave. Instead, he slowly stayed by the mother and infant's side. He didn't know specifically what to do at first, and could only stay and watch clumsily. But as time went by, he began to go out and search for food, then bring the food back. It is also here that another huge advantage of upright walking began to manifest. No matter how strong a quadruped is at transporting, the only thing that can steadily carry supplies is its mouth. They can drag prey to a relatively safe place, but they cannot run too far with heavy food in their mouths, let alone carry food, while dealing with enemies. Uneaten meat is often just left behind, benefiting scavengers in the end. But Ardipithecus was different. Upright, walking freed their hands. They could carry things in their arms and take them away, moving food from point A to point B, and bringing surplus resources back to their partners and infants. This point seems ordinary, but it is actually extremely terrifying. Because as long as food can be steadily brought back, the cost structure of raising offspring is completely changed. The mother doesn't have to risk foraging when she is weakest, allowing her to put more energy into nurturing the infant. Because they receive longer and more stable care, the survival rate of the infants will also increase significantly. In other words, the reproductive disadvantages brought by upright walking did not directly push Ardipithecus toward destruction, but instead forced them to use the family to solve this problem. And once the family appeared, something more profound also took root. The cornerstone of civilization. With a family, a stable division of labor emerges. With a division of labor, higher-level cooperation appears. And under the coexistence of cooperation and friction, civilization truly has the possibility of being born. So in your eyes, upright walking and the concept of family are the two key core pieces that have already fallen into the puzzle. They are not yet complete, but the direction is as clear as can be. Soon, this change extended from individuals to the tribe. Ardipithecus no longer went out foraging alone. They acted together in groups of 3s, 4s, or 5s. More apes means more eyes, and vigilance soared accordingly. They would naturally disperse their vision, each staring in one direction. Once any sign of movement was discovered, an alarm would be sounded immediately. Even when encountering danger, signs of covering each other and retreating together began to appear. And because of this, the first to notice something was wrong was actually the Galbang nation. What the Galbang nation observed was precisely the Meteorotus, saber-toothed cat. For a long time before this, Ardipithecus cadaba was almost the most stable and easiest prey for the saber-toothed cat. The audience of the Galbang nation, every time they saw the saber-toothed cat easily capture Ardipithecus, would be extremely excited, as if even if they couldn't suppress Longjiu in reality, they could at least gain the upper hand in the game. But as time passed, they increasingly found that the task of hunting Ardipithecus had inexplicably become difficult. In the past, as long as a saber-toothed cat targeted Ardipithecus, it would succeed 9 times out of 10. Now, they were often discovered from a great distance. Ardipithecus would turn and run, and their escape was clearly more organized. Soon the sky screen gave the most intuitive demonstration. Cha Te-Hien locked the observation perspective on a Meteorotus closest to the Ardipithecus habitat. That saber-toothed cat did not disappoint. It discovered traces of Ardipithecus in the distance early on. It also knew very well that if it rashly pounced into complex forests and shrublands, Ardipithecus could simply climb back up, and the hunt would fail instead. So it chose to ambush. The greatest skill of a top hunter is never just the pounce, but also patience. It lay in the grass, motionless for several hours, until high noon when the sun was most brutal. 4 Ardipithecus finally came out together. They specifically chose this time to come out and forage, clearly a result of accumulated experience. It's too hot at noon. Quadrupedal predators are often unwilling to move for long, while Ardipithecus, with better heat dissipation due to being upright, is actually more suited for activity at this time. But this time, they still ran into a sufficiently patient hunter. The Meteorotus lowered its body bit by bit, slowly approaching. The muscles also tense up. It's like a fully drawn bow, just waiting for that final burst. But right at the moment he was about to spring forward, one of the vigilant ground apes suddenly detected something unusual. It called out urgently. That sound was full of warning signs. Even the saber-toothed tiger was startled, reacting in unison. The next second, all 4 ground apes turned and fled at once. What's even more remarkable is that they each ran in a different direction. Clearly, they've developed some instinctive coping strategies. Once discovered, they scatter immediately, forcing the predator to hesitate over whom to chase first. Sure enough, the saber-toothed tiger hesitated. He looked left and right, unsure and indecisive. The optimal moment to strike passed in an instant. By the time he finally chose to chase, the 4 ground apes had already widened the gap, and the scorching sun overhead quickly raised his body temperature. He opened his mouth wide, panting heavily. His body has already started to issue an overheating warning. Food is certainly important, but if he pursues too aggressively, he risks his own safety, which would be a lose-lose situation. As a result, he could only watch helplessly as the ground apes escaped. Finally, he retreated reluctantly back to the shade. The Galbang Nation livestream exploded. They couldn't accept that a group of monkeys who should be easy prey were becoming harder and harder to catch. More importantly, in their opinion, this absolutely couldn't be a capability evolved by the ancestral apes themselves. It's clearly that you secretly used active intervention. Otherwise, with those weak apes, how could they escape under the saber-toothed tiger's nose? As a result, the Galbang Nation audience became convinced this was what happened. Even Cha Tae-hyun himself glanced back in your direction, his brow furrowed, almost certain you'd tampered with things. From his perspective, he figured you most likely boosted the apes' neural response, or their alertness. So that's why they sensed danger in advance. But he didn't know that until now, you hadn't used even a single active intervention yet. But that doesn't really matter. Since Galbang Nation has decided that Dragon Nation acted first, they won't just sit back and watch anymore. Cha Tae-hyun quickly decided to immediately use one active intervention opportunity and simultaneously connect for outside support. Intervening in Earth Online is never as simple as randomly upgrading abilities. To boost strength, you have to adjust muscles, increase size, and you need to modify the skeleton. To help land animals adapt to water, you even have to redo the respiratory system. Any mistake in any link can trigger a chain reaction of failures. Of course, you can't just give a land predator a set of gills and be done with it, because chances are the final result would be it breathes with gills on land and uses lungs in the water instead, which would lead to disaster. So in this regard, Cha Tae-hyun wouldn't dare act alone. His intervention count quickly dropped from 3 to 2. Then the Galbang Nation research team established communication successfully. Their side was eagerly geared up. Judging by their attitude, this might be the best opportunity to establish an advantage. So their intention was clear. They absolutely wanted to gain a decisive lead in this version. However, the research team didn't recommend directly altering the saber-toothed tiger's physical structure. The reason was simple. Their understanding of this creature wasn't thorough enough. Blindly strengthening it might ruin a version advantage instead. So they focused on another area: its lifestyle and environmental preferences. Through long-term observation, they noticed that while saber-toothed tigers usually acted alone, they didn't have strong territorial exclusivity. In the same region, it wasn't uncommon to see 2 or 3 or even 4 saber-toothed tigers simultaneously.
They
were more in a state between solitary and social living. Since that's the case, there was no need to forcibly alter its physique, but instead,
target
its mindset, making it feel its current habitat was unsuitable, and needing to migrate to a better area. And that better place was exactly where the ancestral apes were currently active. This was almost an open surrounding maneuver. A single scattered saber-toothed tiger was already formidable. But if more and more saber-toothed tigers gathered in one area, then no matter how cooperative or alert the apes were, it would be hard to escape a large-scale predator encirclement. What's even scarier is that this wasn't just targeting the ancestral apes. From the perspective of the Galbang Nation research team, the real hidden feature of this version was probably no longer trying to help your species survive, but to use active intervention to launch a full-on ecological squeeze, compressing the survival space of others. Once the strategy was set, Cha Tae-hyun immediately acted. This area currently, used by the ancestral apes as their habitat, was already a region with complex terrain. It had forests, grasslands, mountains, and shrub zones all present. And there were already a few saber-toothed tigers nearby. As the intervention was carried out according to Galbang Nation's habits, every saber-toothed tiger across the continent suddenly developed a strong subconscious tendency that the place they currently live isn't comfortable enough, not quite suitable for them. Their ideal habitat is in another direction, so a massive migration began. One by one, saber-toothed tigers left their original territories, heading toward the same destination. Above the sky, a continental map was even projected directly, Dense clusters of red dots slowly converged from all directions. At a glance, the number had already reached tens of thousands. Among them, some might stop midway if they find a similar environment. But the overall trend is now irreversible. The saber-toothed tiger, this species already at the top of the ecological niche, is being artificially pushed into a massive gathering. And once this power really converges around the ancestor ape's territory, not only a few hunts will be rewritten, but the entire area's ecological balance. By then, not just ancestor ape's home, but many neighboring species will likely become victims beneath this wave of apex predators. Staring at the map and seeing the red dots grow ever denser, everyone in Gabang Nation was already starting to celebrate early. They imagined a pack of saber-toothed tigers sweeping through, completely crushing the territory and flattening any other competitors along the way. Whether it's Dragon Nation or a Sakura Nation, in their imagination, they all seemed destined for the next round, to be eliminated inevitably. For a moment, Gabang Nation seemed lost in blissful fantasy. Gabang Nation's intervention worked extremely fast. Soon after, the population of saber-toothed tigers in the ancestor ape's territory started to skyrocket. In this area before, having 3 or 4 saber-toothed tigers active at the same time was already considered a lot. But now small groups come together. Saber-toothed tigers are everywhere. Their numbers have increased at least tenfold and are still rising. With this, the ancestor apes who just managed to carve out a bit of living space through cooperative families and group vigilance suddenly found themselves squeezed to the point of barely being able to breathe. Previously, seeing one saber-toothed tiger turning and escaping was enough. Now seeing one usually means there are more lurking nearby. Once the apes venture out for food, they're likely to stumble right into an ambush. Chances of returning safely are getting lower. Food sources are no longer stable. The entire population is once again pushed to the brink of crisis. Outside the sky, Dragon Nation's livestream exploded. Everyone could see this isn't normal competition from Gabang Nation, but a blatant move targeting Dragon Nation. In the chat, some condemned Gabang for their unfair tactics. Others anxiously urged, since the opposition is actively intervening, you should act right away. Before more saber-toothed tigers fully converge, have the ancestor apes migrate quickly. Better than waiting around to die. Dragon Nation's research group members like Chinluo were also worried. The problem is, they know the crisis is coming, but have no way to actively make contact. Under the new rules, only if the civilization observer personally chooses outside assistance can the nation intervene in communication. In other words, before you press that button, the research group can't even remind you to evacuate. However, you clearly noticed the abnormal increase in saber-toothed tigers. Of course you've already noticed. You looked up at Gabang Nation's Cha Taeyan. He seemed to catch your eye as well, then smugly curled his lips, mouth moving silently, clearly telling you you're doomed to lose. You just calmly watched him, then silently replied with 4 words, short-sighted. Because in your view, Gabang Nation's move here is apparently aimed at blocking the ancestor apes, but is actually foolishly self-destructive. Saber-toothed tigers are already apex predators. Their individual abilities secure their place atop the food chain, but Gabang Nation wasn't satisfied, insisting on interfering proactively, forcing a large number of saber-toothed tigers into the same region. By doing this, a short-term overwhelming force is achieved, but they clearly didn't consider ecosystems need more than just hunters. If there are too many hunters, prey won't increase proportionally. It might even decrease due to the sudden rise in danger. Herds instinctively run far away, and once prey around is eaten or scared away, this area will quickly fall into resource depletion. The gathered saber-toothed tigers won't be able to support themselves, and chaos will follow. So this move may seem intensely oppressive, but in reality, it's short-sighted and unsustainable. Besides, ancestor apes never really had a strong sense of territory. From sparse woods early on, they've been chased all the way to mountain tops. Migration isn't anything new for them. Seeking safety is a basic animal instinct. When they can't stay any longer, they'll move on. So you're not worried that the ancestor apes will be crushed this time. Still, Gabang Nation's move did remind you. The apes' basics are nearly complete. They're walking upright. Family concepts are emerging. Cooperative awareness has appeared. Since that's the case, it's time for their first truly core innate skill to be installed. For your first proactive intervention for the ancestor apes, we're clear from the start. Unlock throwing. With normal evolution, this step would take at least several 100,000 more years, until the apes fully adapt to walking upright and further change their arm structure. Only then might it develop slowly. But you don't have time to wait for natural progression. So you plan to accelerate this evolution directly. With this in mind, you pulled up full data panels for 10 groups of apes and pressed the intervention button. At this moment, the Dragon Nation research group finally breathed a long sigh of relief. At least from this action. You're not just sitting on your hands. Qinlao quickly had everyone pull up all current analysis, ready to give the most comprehensive intervention advice. The moment you initiate outside assistance. But in the next second, they were all stunned. Because you, simply, didn't intend to open that green outside assistance button. Instead, you just started operating directly yourself. The researchers were completely baffled, but your mind was crystal clear. For the terrifying upright apes, what really put them at the top of the world wasn't just their size, nor brute force alone, but strategic advantages unlike any other. Upright walking was one, and throwing was another. To give the ancestor apes real throwing ability, the key is not just learning to toss things, but rebuilding their bodies, giving them efficient and threatening hardware conditions for throwing. You first focus your attention on the spine and shoulders of the Australopithecus. Now, the ancestral Australopithecus, thanks to prolonged upright posture, has developed a clearly distinctive, shaped spine. Instead of the traditional C-shaped one, this is absolutely crucial, because the S-shaped spine not only handles the vertical pressure of upright walking, but also gives the waist greater rotational ability. It can act like a spring, storing and releasing some power. This is the core foundation for winding up during a throw. With this base, next comes the shoulders. At this point, the Australopithecus's shoulders are still more like typical primates, short with limited range of motion. The joints seem locked in place and can't perform the human style, large-scale pulling back to wind up for a throw. So the first thing you need to do is unlock them. You start by lengthening the collarbones, directly widening the shoulders, making the shoulder line closer to a human structure. Next, at the shoulder position, you adjust the shoulder joint's opening angle so the arm can pull farther back. Then, you reinforce the muscles, tendons, and ligaments around the shoulder joint, making the whole structure not only more stable, but also much more elastic. In simple terms, you're transforming the upper body of the ancestral Australopithecus into an actual biological slingshot. The wide collarbone acts as the bow frame. Shoulder joint expansion is the bow being drawn. Reinforced ligament and tendon are the bowstring. And the S-shaped spine and waist rotation are responsible for even more winding up power when it's time for an actual throw. Strength doesn't just rely on arm muscles to toss forward, but comes from standing firmly with the feet, rotating the waist and back, pulling the shoulders back, until the whole arm swings forward in one motion, forming a highly efficient kinetic energy transfer system. This means Australopithecus finally breaks free from the close combat limits that almost all terrestrial animals are forced to obey in nature. Before your modifications, Australopithecus could throw things, of course, but it was more like tossing, with locked shoulders and limited movement. No matter how hard they tried to throw, the speed was only about 30 kilometers per hour, and the range was usually just 5 to 10 meters. Not very threatening at all. But after your modifications, everything changed. Now they could really pull the stone back and use their entire body's elastic potential to hurl it out. That's no longer just tossing, but true striking power, 10 or even dozens of meters. For most predators in nature, that distance gap is nearly impossible to breach. If you want to overpower me, you have to get close. And as you come near, I move back. If you hesitate, I launch a ranged counterattack. If in the future the ability to use tools is unlocked even further, what gets thrown will no longer just be stones, but even more threatening defensive tools, having only strong close combat ability, conform effective contact. This is true dimensional suppression. And for this reason, you know very well, this modification isn't just normal enhancement, but a unique talent exclusive to ancestral Australopithecus and future human ancestors. No other creature can develop it, because it's never just about altering the shoulder, but the upright spine, collaborating with waist, collarbones, joints, and ligaments to create a unique advantage. After you finish all this, you're very satisfied with the adjustment results before you. And as your intervention ends, the modifications you made to Australopithecus are quickly shared throughout the entire population. Bodies of Australopithecus quietly start to change. Shoulders become broader, collarbones become longer, muscles behind the shoulders rise a bit, and the whole body seems a bit more robust overall. Although this change was obvious, it didn't immediately alter their daily lives, because they themselves had no idea what was actually happening to their bodies. They continued living as usual. It's just that lately, saber-toothed tigers have been appearing more and more often. The forest where they used to live has become increasingly dangerous, so the ground apes were forced to retreat further into the mountains. The mountain terrain is complex, which can effectively limit the saber-tooth's charges. And there are naturally formed caves in the mountains, which are much safer than the open forest. At this moment, a mother ape is holding her months-old infant, sitting at the entrance of a cave, lost in thought. She's waiting for the male ground apes who went out for food to return. Ever since the concept of family appeared, this division of labor has become more and more natural. The female apes are responsible for nurturing the young. The males have taken on more of the job of foraging outside. But it's getting dark today, and the apes who went out still haven't come back. Time passes little by little. Dusk falls. The world outside becomes increasingly dangerous. For the ground apes, nightfall is almost like turning up the dial on danger. Their night vision is nowhere near as good as the predators. Once they lose sight, all the cooperation and vigilance in the world doesn't help much. The mother ape naturally can't understand the complex emotion of worry yet, but she can feel hunger. She needs food, and so does the young one in her arms. The other apes in the cave are the same. Finally, in the orange afterglow of evening, several figures slowly made their way back from the distance. They're the ground apes who went out. 6 in total. Each one is carrying a pile of fist-sized fruits. The mother ape gets excited immediately, howling to call her companions inside the cave. Soon, one after another, the apes run to the cave entrance. After seeing their returning companions, they instinctively cheer that food has arrived. Tonight, they can finally settle in. But when the 6 apes actually enter and pile the fruit in a corner of the cave, someone quickly notices something is wrong. Back at noon today, more than a dozen went out. Now only half have returned. Some of them circle the 6 returnees, then run to the cave entrance to look outside, as if asking, where are the others? Those who made it back glance at each other, with clear panic in their expressions.
Today,
they were attacked by 6 saber-toothed tigers. Those predators came too quickly, and too aggressively. Just one encounter was enough to scatter the group's formation. Some of their companions didn't make it, if not for the fact that the saber-tooth pack quickly got distracted by their captured prey. The rest of the apes wouldn't even have had a chance to escape. This message needed no words. The air of panic alone said enough. But being less intelligent also had its perks. They wouldn't stay sad for a long time like humans would. The pressure of survival in nature is always direct, so hunger quickly overpowers everything else. The apes gather around in a circle and begin splitting up the pile of heavy fruit. It's a kind of large fruit, like a nut. Tastes pretty good, but the shell is extremely hard. Usually the apes eat it by gnawing it open with their teeth. They're still quite beastly in nature. Their canines are sharp enough, so they can manage, but it's exhausting. Soon, the sound of gnawing fills the cave. However, the mother ape, holding her baby, only has one free hand, so she really can't use much strength. After gnawing for ages, she still can't open it. and is growing desperate. At that moment, she looks down and sees a rock by her feet. As if something suddenly occurs to her, she puts the fruit on the ground, picks up the stone, raises it high, and smashes it down hard. With a crisp crack, the hard shell splits open. The mother ape is instantly thrilled, and hurriedly stuffs the fruit flesh into her mouth. The ape across from her sees this, and his eyes light up. He points at the stone by her feet, then gestures with the fruit in his own hand, making his meaning clear. Let me use that. The mother ape gets it, and, like usual, casually tosses the stone across to him. But the problem is, her body now is not the same as it was just moments ago. Her shoulder opens up, the angle is greater, her collarbone is longer, her entire throwing structure has been remade. The mother ape herself has no idea anything's changed, and uses her usual strength, about 80% power. But the next moment, the stone hurtles out far faster than ever before, and smashes straight into the other ape's forehead. With a thud, that ape is knocked backward by the force, clutching his head and rolling around, howling in pain. All the other apes in the cave are stunned. The mother ape is shocked too. She doesn't really understand. It was just a small stone. How could it pack such a punch? And after the one who got hit recovered from the pain, he actually realized something was different about the force. He picked up the culprit, turning it over and over for ages, completely unable to understand how such a little thing could hit so hard. He couldn't make sense of it, so he gave it a try. He gripped the stone, turned to a larger, burly ape, and threw it at him. Clang, a direct hit. The ape who got hit was equally unprepared, and cried out in pain. At that moment, he'd found a new world. He got excited immediately, and started frantically picking up stones, throwing them one after the other at his companions. One couldn't dodge in time. Two got hit, causing chaos in the cave. The more he threw, the more excited he became, almost jumping with joy. Until in the end, he angered everyone completely, and they pinned him down to teach him a lesson. He finally stopped. But even after getting stopped, he was still eager to express something. After finally breaking free, he immediately pointed at the stones on the ground, then made an exaggerated throwing gesture, mouthing sounds like whoosh, bang, grunt, crack. With this sort of acted-out demonstration, the rest of the apes seemed to gradually catch on. The power wasn't from a special stone, but from the act of throwing it with force. So more apes started experimenting. They picked up stones from the ground. Some threw them far away. Some threw them at tree trunks. It didn't take long to discover that once a stone was flying through the air, it carried a shockingly strong force. Hit a thick tree trunk, and it could even leave a clear mark. The burliest ape of all was especially impressive. After using all his strength, he could toss a stone dozens of meters. The whole cave instantly fell into a frenzy of excitement. They quickly figured out an even finer point. Stones that are too small lack force. Too big and they can't throw them far. Only those that are palm to hand-sized and of medium weight work best. The most powerful and handy. So a group of terrestrial apes started frantically collecting these perfectly sized stones. It was like unexpectedly getting a top-tier new toy. They were so excited they couldn't stop at all. As a result, it was already pitch black outside. But they were still making a ruckus inside the cave. The night was quiet, so their noise stood out even more. At the same time, in the Gabang live stream, Cha Taehyun's perspective was locked onto 3 saber-toothed tigers, still looking for food after nightfall. More and more saber-toothed tigers had recently migrated here. The competition pressure shot up. Naturally, a lot ended up hungry. These 3 were among them. They couldn't find much prey along the edge of the plains and woods, so they decided to risk sneaking into the mountainous forest. And because of that, they soon heard the commotion coming from the cave, the ceaseless noises made by the apes. The Galbang viewers were at first stunned, then immediately perked up. Someone had already checked the Longo livestream, and sure enough, it really was a group of apes there. They were happily playing with stones. From their perspective, this seemed like the perfect hunting opportunity. So the three saber-toothed tigers quickly lowered their bodies and silently crept towards the cave under cover of night. Nighttime is always the best cover for predators. Even for huge beasts like them, as long as they move carefully, they can stay well hidden. Soon they got close to the cave entrance. In the Longguo livestream, the viewers could barely watch anymore, because everyone knew that even a single saber-toothed tiger was enough to put massive pressure on the apes. Now there were three, and the cave was a closed space. If they get trapped inside, dozens of apes would be in extreme danger. Sure enough, the leading saber-toothed tiger had already stepped into the cave entrance. It first twitched its nose, sniffed the air inside, and quickly confirmed there were quite a few targets. It was getting ready to attack. But just as it was about to launch its ambush, a stone suddenly flew out from inside the cave, striking the mountain wall beside it with a sharp, crisp sound. Then it rolled to its feet. The noise was so abrupt, it startled all three saber-toothed tigers, making them jump in shock and quickly retreat 2 steps. They growled at the stone. That tiger's roar instantly made everyone in the cave quiet down in fear. They were all too familiar with that sound. It was the saber-toothed tiger, their longtime oppressor. By the faint moonlight, the apes inside the cave finally saw the huge silhouette at the entrance. The massive body, threatening size, the sense of oppression almost seemed to fill the whole cave. And what was worse, soon 2 more shadows appeared on either side of the cave entrance, completely blocking the exit. The 3 saber-toothed tigers stood like 3 walls. Dozens of apes could only squeeze into the deepest part of the cave, backs against the rocky wall, with nowhere left to retreat. The leading saber-toothed tiger, after confirming the stone wouldn't move on its own, redirected its gaze to the group of targets hidden in the darkness. It lowered its body slightly, this time not to hide, but to charge faster. The other 2 did the same. In their eyes, this group of apes was nothing to worry about. What was coming next was pure domination. So all 3 beasts lunged at once, charging ferociously into the group of apes. And at that very moment, the ape sitting in the front row did something different. He was the one who first discovered the usefulness of the stones. He was trembling with nerves as well, his heart almost jumping out of his chest. He wanted to hide behind his companions too, but couldn't squeeze in. So he had to stand on the very edge, right in the front. He watched the 3 saber-toothed tigers lower themselves, and saw them closing in fast. Before, this scene would have made him lose the courage to resist. Every primitive sense in his blood, every instinct in his body, told him to run. Run fast yet. He was still desperately clutching a stone the size of his fist. At that moment, he couldn't even tell what he was thinking. Maybe it was just pure nervousness. Maybe it was just a reaction to extreme anxiety. Maybe it was just his survival instinct forcing him to react. Either way, he suddenly opened his mouth wide. He let out a high-pitched roar, as if trying to summon his own courage, and as if it were a desperate declaration. And with that shout, it was like he woke himself up from just standing there. He suddenly straightened his body. His waist twisted to its limit. His arms stretched as far back as they could go. This was a move he'd only just figured out earlier that day. But now he instinctively used it in full. His whole body became like a bow pulled to its very limits. The stone in his hand became an arrow about to be released. The next moment he hurled the stone with all his strength. Whoosh, as the stone shot out at incredible speed. It made a fierce sound slicing through the air. The saber-toothed tiger at the very front, already less than 10 meters away. At that distance, the saber-toothed tiger had no time to react at all, not even able to see what was flying toward it. The stone, carrying huge kinetic energy, smashed straight into its face. The fastest of the saber-toothed tigers was instantly shaken by the impact. The powerful force instantly distorted its movement, and the whole body lost balance, crashing heavily to the ground. It even experienced a brief dizziness. What just happened? The other 2 saber-toothed tigers behind it also stopped in their tracks immediately. They saw with their own eyes. Their companion in the front hadn't even reached the target, but as if struck by an invisible force, it toppled over directly. That sight filled them with great apprehension. For a moment they didn't even dare to rush forward again, only circling warily around their falling companion, trying to figure out what had just happened. As for the saber-toothed tiger on the ground, it was even more dizzy at the moment. That fist-sized rock wasn't enough to kill, but the sheer impact was enough to throw off its attacking rhythm. It barely managed to turn over, trying to stand up, but wobbled a bit, and could only lie there, letting out a low warning growl. On the side of the earth ape, the one who had thrown the stone was also breathing heavily, but looking at the once overbearing oppressor, now lying defeated in front of him. He suddenly realized something he'd never considered before. He could actually make these towering beasts falter. Turns out, the ferocious animals who always chased them into a scatter could also be forced to halt by some kind of power. This realization was still vague, not quite a true thought yet, but it had already started to take root in the earth ape's mind. Maybe he wasn't so weak after all. Maybe facing danger wasn't just about running away. So he picked up another stone. This time he didn't back down. Instead, he roared loudly to his companions behind him, as if encouraging them, and also as if sending some sort of signal. And his companions did see it. They saw the saber-toothed tiger shaken by the blow, saw the other two hesitate too. The earth ape once again assumed his stance, and hurled another rock. This time, the rock hit the fallen saber-toothed tiger squarely on its side, making it let out another retreating whimper. The other two saber-toothed tigers were truly stunned now, even instinctively taking a few steps back. That scene, for the dozens of earth apes in the cave, was almost like a live tutorial. So throwing stones with force really could make these dangerous beasts retreat. As the saber-toothed tigers backed away, the panic in the earth apes' hearts quickly faded as well. They all lowered their heads, looking at the scattered rocks on the ground. What had been just toys in the daytime suddenly became a means they could rely on. So, one earth ape after another bent down to pick up stones. Soon, over half of the earth apes were grasping rocks. In the darkness, their eyes weren't just full of panic anymore, but instead all stared intently at the three saber-toothed tigers at the cave entrance. The saber-toothed tigers also sensed the change of atmosphere. Once, those looks held only fear and retreat before the strong, before the powerful. But this time, for the first time, they felt that what was facing them were no longer just passive prey. From this moment on, the tables had turned. Inside the pitch-black cave, visibility was extremely low. For the saber-toothed tigers who have night vision, this should have been the perfect hunting ground. The cave wasn't deep, with barely 20 or 30 meters from entrance to the far end, and not even 5 meters wide. 3 massive saber-toothed tigers blocking the entrance. Dozens of earth apes huddled in the farthest corner, looked like a ready-made buffet. Logically speaking, this hunt should have been a landslide. But ever since that very first unremarkable stone toppled the lid saber-toothed tiger, everything had changed. In Gaobang Nation's exclusive livestream, chat was flooded with ridicule just a second ago, but the next moment, it was as if someone had hit the mute button. The barrage of comments abruptly stopped. Only the images on the stream kept moving forward. Meanwhile, in the Dragon Nation livestream, the chat exploded. Forget Gaobang viewers. Even Dragon Nation viewers themselves didn't expect it. What seemed like a certain death situation would take such a crazy turn because of just a stone. Such a ridiculous twist. Throwing stones is such a normal thing for modern people, who didn't toss pebbles across water as a kid, or throw seeds and stones at tree trunks for fun. So when everyone saw the earth apes hurling rocks at each other inside the cave, no one thought much of it. Who could have imagined that this seemingly childish act could actually force back 3 apex prehistoric predators on the spot, and even knock one down right there? At the Dragon Nation research group, there was dead silence too. Just moments ago, everyone thought it was over for Dragon Nation this time. But then suddenly everything changed dramatically, leaving everyone stunned. Old Chin was silent for a long time, his brow deeply furrowed. It was only now that he truly understood what that time you refused outside assistance, insisting on intervening on your own, had really brought about. He often let out a breath and finally admitted, "We all underestimated this new civilization observer." In Old Chin's eyes, the issue wasn't the stones themselves, but that before, they'd always seen things from a human perspective. For modern people, fighting lions or tigers with stones seems stupid because humans have much safer and more efficient ways to kill, like guns or traps. So we subconsciously assume stones could never pose a real threat to such large predators. But if you look from another angle, from the perspective of a beast, it's a whole different story. From the very start of Earth Online until now, whether it's the giant beasts of the dinosaur era or the top mammals of today, in order to hurt their enemies, they can only follow the same rules. They have to get close. Has to be close combat, using claws or fangs, horns, or other close contact means. Decide the winner. Who's bigger, who's faster, who bites harder. That one is stronger. But in such a world, when a group capable of long-range attacks appeared, the rules were completely shattered. No matter how sharp your claws are, or how terrifying your fangs are, if you can't reach me, it means nothing. Once Diligent realized this, he finally understood why you didn't need their advice at all. The research team had always been thinking before how to make up for the geographical disadvantages of Group 10, as much as possible within the existing rules of the ecosystem. But you took a different approach. You weren't fixing weaknesses. You were changing the rules directly. Let the primitive ground apes break free from the biological law of close combat. They leapfrogged ahead. And precisely because of that, the situation inside the cave flipped completely. Facing dozens of ground apes raising stones at once, the three saber-toothed tigers instinctively sensed danger. Their exceptional night vision let them see clearly. The group of apes raising their hands, striking a pose, like strange little catapults. The very next second, a dense barrage of stones came smashing down like rain. At that moment, for the three saber-toothed tigers, their world collapsed. The two sides were too close, and the cave was way too cramped. The speed of the 10 projectiles was also insanely fast. It all happened in an instant. The three saber-toothed tigers were hit all over their bodies at the same time. The stones were fast and heavy, and each impact brought waves of pain, triggering a constant barrage of blunt force shocks. And when they hit vulnerable spots like the head, face, or joints, the pain doubled. They rolled and roared, trying to dodge. But the problem was, the cave was already narrow. The apes fought as one unit, and the stones came in continuous waves. There was simply no escape. That feeling was even worse than being surrounded by a pack of wild dogs. At least wild dogs would get close to attack, but these stones kept flying from a distance. They had no chance to fight back at all. They had the strength, speed, and fangs, but couldn't even touch their targets. All they could do was passively take the hits. So the apex predators got scared. This isn't a metaphor. It's fear in the truest sense. Their instincts were screaming that it was dangerous here, that there was something wrong with this cave, and that this group of apes was unusual. They had to escape. In nature, if you can't win, you run. If you sense something's wrong, you retreat. That's the most normal choice. It's just, the saber-toothed tigers hadn't encountered anything like this for a very long time. Usually they just pounced, and their prey would panic and flee. No need to even consider whether they would lose. But now the rules didn't apply. Two of the saber-toothed tigers that could still stand made a snap decision and turned to dash out of the cave, trying to use their backs and bodies to take the hits, protecting their heads as they escaped. But the one that charged ahead at first and got struck hard in the head by the first stone was in trouble. He was already dizzy from the blow, and his legs kept getting hit, so he couldn't stand up. All he could do was curl up in place, taking hit after hit from the stone barrage that followed. Bang bang, bang bang. His fur was already a complete mess, with injuries all over his body. The head trauma left him barely able to move, his vision going dark. Until the river rocks on the ground were almost all picked clean by the ground apes, the one-sided assault finally stopped. That saber-toothed tiger wasn't dead immediately, but he was just about done for. His massive body collapsed on the ground, with only weak, intermittent whimpers coming from his mouth. He was extremely weak. Just then, the ground ape that first threw a stone cautiously stuck his head out, first observing from a distance, then nudged and encouraged by his companions, slowly approaching, looking left and right, until he was sure that this once fearsome beast could never get up again. He let out a loud cry, as if to tell his companions it was safe. So more apes gathered around. The strongest ground ape among them even brought over a big rock the size of a basketball. Earlier during the day, they thought these rocks were too heavy and couldn't throw them far. Pretty much useless. But now it became the finishing blow. That strong ape lifted the stone high above his head, then brought it crashing down. With a loud, heavy thud, the saber-toothed tiger took a fatal hit, and its life ended completely. Inside the cave, a chorus of short, excited cries instantly erupted. In the past, it was always the ground apes being hunted by saber-toothed tigers. No one ever imagined that one day a saber-toothed tiger would be lying in front of them, for them to observe as they pleased. At first they were excited, but soon their gazes uncontrollably fell upon the exposed flesh of the saber-toothed tiger. That was meat. Many ground apes instinctively swallowed. At this stage, the ancestral ground ape's main diet was still wild fruits, nuts, and roots. Occasionally, they would catch some non-toxic insects and bugs to supplement their protein. Of course, they needed meat, but they simply had no way to reliably obtain large amounts of meat. But now, an entire saber-toothed tiger lay right in front of them. Such a massive body meant a huge amount of meat. If they split it up, every ground ape could get a fairly large piece. So excitement gradually turned into desire. The ground ape who first tasted the meat was once again pushed out by its companions. Even though the apes had no concept of a king yet, in the face of that life and death crisis just now, he was the first to step forward, the first to hit their mortal enemy, the first to prove that a predator could also fall and could also be wounded. So the others began to instinctively trust him, respect him, and were willing to let him decide what to do next first. As expected, he didn't let his companions down. He sat down right next to the saber-toothed tiger's remains, grabbed the torn flesh with his hands, and ripped it suddenly, tearing off a big chunk of bloody meat and stuffing it into his mouth to chew. The taste was hard to describe. It was tough and gamey, and not really easy to chew. But for him, it was more tempting than any wild fruit or bug he'd eaten before. Far more appealing. His eyes lit up instantly. He called his companions up right away to share. That night, the predator became the prey. For the first time, the ancestral ground apes really tasted the meat of a large animal. And you carefully recorded this scene in your observation notes. Because you understood, this was not just a simple addition to their diet. Going from eating fruits to eating meat may seem like just a change in taste. But in reality, it was like opening Pandora's box. Meat meant higher density protein, fat, and energy. And these things would continually fuel another even more terrifying plug-in, the brain. The viewers from Takaboko Nation watching this scene were almost collectively shocked. In their eyes, this was simply an upheaval. Just before, these monkeys would be terrified and scatter in a panic just hearing a saber-toothed tiger's roar. Now they actually dared to rip the skin and flesh from a saber-toothed tiger. Gnawing on its meat, they couldn't accept it. The livestream chat was filled with curses. But at this very moment, viewers from Dragon Nation finally stood tall. A huge wave of people swarmed into Takaboko Nation's livestream to rub it in. But unlike the emotional crowd, the Takaboko research team remained fairly calm. Someone brought up the question, since the ground apes could actively intervene and develop a throwing skill, could the saber-toothed tiger also be modified like this? But the idea was quickly dismissed. For a very simple reason. The saber-tooth's front paws couldn't even grab, much less hold something steady to throw it. Its body structure was entirely different from the ape's. If you forced the change, it would most likely ruin the physical strengths it already had, and end up losing more than gaining. It wasn't worth it. So in the end, they could only console themselves. This failure was mostly due to the horrible cave environment, with narrow space and close quarters, high numbers of ground apes, and stones that were almost impossible to dodge. That's the only reason the saber-toothed tiger suffered such a big loss. If it were on an open plain, the stones wouldn't have much effect, and couldn't easily inflict serious wounds on a saber-toothed tiger that could still move. What's more, the number of saber-toothed tigers in this area was still increasing, further shrinking the ape's living space. One defeat didn't mean the overall situation had reversed, and so the scenario soon entered a new phase. After tasting meat for the first time, the ground ape's mindset began to change. That entire saber-toothed tiger was enough to feed them until the next day. But once the next day passed, hunger would return. They still needed to go out and search for food again. And at this moment, that same ground ape who first ate had already become the leader of this group. He seemed to possess a rare courage compared to the rest, a certain charisma and decisiveness. So his companions were more willing to follow him and act according to his decisions. The emergence of a leader also made what started as several households, loosely clustered together, become much more unified. In the past, the ground apes would gather because of family bonds, but relations between families were vague and loose. Fights over food or territory happened all the time. Conflicts broke out due to these, but now they were slowly understanding that when facing real crisis, there must be someone who steps up and unites all companions as a team to survive together. Thus, the group began to truly bond. This time, the leader gathered almost 20 ground apes, preparing to leave the cave together in search of food. They were no longer just a few scattered monkeys in loosely formed groups. This was small-scale group action in the real sense. By noon, when the sun was at its hottest, a large troop of ground apes emerged from the cave. 20 or so gathered together, which was quite a sight. Such numbers made many nearby animals instinctively wary. Even some solitary predators, seeing these monkeys travel together from a distance, would stop and observe first, not daring to approach rashly. Even the apes themselves clearly felt the advantage of having so many companions. They were no longer as cautious as before, no longer tiptoeing along every path, afraid of suddenly being snatched up by a predator. Now over 20 pairs of eyes were on the lookout together, giving a much stronger sense of safety. On this excursion, their target was an orchard outside the forest. They would need to cross a short stretch of plain, about 3 kilometers in total. That orchard was filled with a type of hard fruit they loved to eat, and now was the fruiting season. Before setting off, the leader bent down and picked up a rock of suitable size, clearly very satisfied with it. He then called for his companions to each bring some as well. They had already witnessed firsthand the power of stones. These stones were survival tools. Even with only 2 hands, they couldn't carry much, but at least it was enough to deter potential predators. But just as they were about to leave, the leader's gaze was suddenly attracted by a broken branch near a tree root. It was more than a meter long, about as thick as a wrist. It probably fell when an animal resting in the tree broke it. The leader stared at it for a long time, until his companions started urging him to go. Only then did he bend down to pick up the wooden stick, weighing it in his hands. Then he tried swinging it, and it made a clear whooshing sound cutting through the air. The leader's eyes lit up instantly, because after you modified their body structure, the geo-apes not only unlocked the ability to throw, but also gained greater shoulder flexibility and stronger waist twisting abilities. In other words, when they swing their clubs, the force transfers even more fiercely than before. The whole wooden stick can almost be swung by them, with explosive power similar to a whip. Of course, the geo-apes have no idea about these mechanics. They just know this thing looks powerful and probably works very well. So a group of clever monkeys immediately started searching everywhere nearby for fallen limbs. Wooden sticks were quickly cleared out from all around. Among the 20-odd geo-apes, a dozen or so found suitable sticks to wield. The rest grabbed stones in their hands. And so a strange team appeared. A group of upright geo-apes, holding a stick in one hand, gripping a stone in the other, marching out of the forest in a mighty swarm. In the Dragon Nation's live stream, many people were already having a good laugh. Some said they were getting less and less able to take this geo-ape group seriously, because they always see the shadow of themselves as a kid swinging random branches by the village entrance. Others joked that as kids, whenever they saw a good stick by the roadside, no one could resist picking it up and swinging it a few times. Jokes aside, more and more Dragon Nation viewers started to vaguely realize that this ancestral geo-ape group seemed to be truly different. They were still weak, still nowhere near a strong species this version. But there was a sense they could actually accomplish something. That was starting to emerge. Meanwhile, the ecological changes on the plains also began to show signs. Because Stick Nation forcibly gathered a huge number of saber-toothed tigers, other large animals in the area noticeably decreased, either hunted or scared away. The entire plain was becoming more and more like a paradise for saber-toothed tigers. The geo-apes, of course, didn't understand any of this. But once they stepped onto the plain, they still quickly attracted several roaming lesser saber-toothed tigers. A total of 3 or 4 saber-toothed tigers noticed this group of monkeys from different directions. But this time, things were different from before. 20-odd geo-apes moving together was too big a show of force for these normally solitary saber-toothed tigers. It was the first time they'd ever seen a monkey pack this big. More importantly, Stick Nation had interfered with their habits, causing saber-toothed tigers to gather in the same area. But pack hunting logic doesn't form overnight. Deep down, saber-toothed tigers still believed they were lone hunters, at most just acknowledging there might be others nearby, but rarely actively cooperating to hunt. So, none of these saber-toothed tigers pounced right away. Instead, they stuck to their old hunting habits, watching from afar, quietly following, waiting for someone in the geo-ape group to be alone or fall behind, or for the formation to loosen up, then suddenly strike. They tailed the group like this, following the geo-apes to the fruit grove. After the geo-apes entered the fruit grove, the saber-toothed tigers still didn't move, because the fruit grove's environment was complicated. Rushing in recklessly wouldn't guarantee an easy catch. They could even expose themselves. The Stick Nation research lead was so frustrated, he was grinding his teeth, wishing he could rush into the barrier and teach them how to ambush prey personally. But instincts aren't commands. Saber-toothed tigers could only act on their own logic. Gradually, 2 saber-toothed tigers lost patience first, because they found better prey elsewhere. Samo Lin's terrestrial animals were bigger than geo-apes. Just one would fill them up and posed less risk, so they left decisively. Only 2 remained at the fruit grove's edge. Half an hour later, well-fed and still clutching their fruit, the geo-apes began their journey back. Nothing happened along the way, which inevitably made them let down their guard a bit, and their formation wasn't as tight as before. The 2 saber-toothed tigers lying in wait had been waiting for just this moment. One of them was already starving and couldn't wait any longer, so it lunged out first. The other was actually more patient. But as soon as its companion moved, its own location was exposed too, so it had to charge in as well. Suddenly, the sound of running erupted across the grassland. The intense pressure of a top predator was at its peak. The first saber-toothed tiger moved lightning fast, pouncing and knocking a geo-ape down in an instant. Its claws slashed down, causing a fatal injury. As the screams rang out, the Stick Nation's live stream exploded with cheers, while Dragon Nation viewers instantly felt their hearts jump into their throats. But before they could celebrate for long, a stone suddenly flew over and struck the saber-toothed tiger hard. The saber-toothed tiger was stunned on the spot. Clearly, within 2 meters around him, there were no other enemies at all. Under normal circumstances, any creature approaching this range, he could detect and counter instantly. He already had his prey pinned under his paw. In theory, he was completely safe. So why did the attack still come? His simple brain just couldn't comprehend it. Soon more stones came flying. The hunt was forcefully interrupted.
He panicked and shook his head side to side.
Only feeling pain, but unable to find the source of the attack. The feeling was like invisible enemies hiding everywhere. But staying any longer could be dangerous, so he decisively left the prey behind, turned and fled. The rest of the team rushed up immediately, dragged their wounded companion back to the group. The chief researcher of the Central High-Stick Nation saw this scene and was nearly on the verge of breakdown. They were so close to settling it completely. If only they dragged it off, it'd be over. But this precisely revealed the fundamental difference between him and the saber-toothed tiger. Humans think in terms of maximizing gains, while beasts always choose survival first. Whenever there is a remote threat he can't understand nearby, instinct forces him to retreat first. Of course, this also shows one thing. On open ground, just relying on stones, it's indeed difficult for the earth apes to directly pose a lethal threat to a still-moving saber-toothed tiger, deliver fatal danger. Unless they hit a key spot immediately, the tiger will most likely escape. But the thing is, escaping alone means the earth apes win. And the second saber-toothed tiger was targeting the leader of the earth apes. Because his companion got exposed first, his attack lacked the best element of surprise. The leader sensed danger instantly and threw the only stone in his hand. The saber-toothed tiger was lucky, or its reaction was genuinely fast. It suddenly leapt aside, dodging the stone's trajectory toward its face. But precisely because of that dodge, his pounce was disrupted. His movements clearly stalled a bit. That brief pause was plenty. The leader gripped tightly a meter-long thick wooden club and swung it sideways in one fluid motion. A dull thud sounded. The saber-toothed tiger was directly stunned by the blow. He just couldn't figure out why the monkey suddenly had such a hard and fast-swinging arm. The impact was like getting rammed by a large creature at high speed. It hurt in the most baffling way. The pain made no sense. What unsettled him even more was the leader wasn't scared off. Instead, he kept roaring while swinging the club and advancing. The club whooshed loudly as it swung, almost leaving phantom trails, and the leader's arm span. This created a dangerous radius that the saber-toothed tiger just wouldn't dare recklessly enter. If he stepped back, the leader stepped forward. As he retreated, the leader pressed on, until other earth apes approached with stones and clubs, closed in from this direction. The saber-toothed tiger finally gave up completely, turned to leave. That hit to his cheek still burned with pain, but he just couldn't figure out how he even got struck. All he remembered was that thing swung way too fast.